Hello everyone. In this video, we will understand what are the application hosting options which are available in Azure Cloud. If I wanted to have full control of my application, I can use the virtual machine. I can install the application. I can also install the application on the containers. So we have an option in Azure Cloud to use the containers to install the applications. This is by running the image of my application. This image I can get it from the hub.docker.com. There are other services which is called as Azure App Service. These are all platform as a service. Azure App Services are nothing but the platform as a service wherein we can bring our code and deploy our code into the Azure App Services. So App Services enables us to build and host the web application. App Services supports automatic scaling and high availability. App Services supports Windows and Linux operating system, wherein you can deploy your code onto any one of the operating system. You can select the operating system, either it can be Windows or Linux. Also, you can integrate with GitHub, Git, or Azure DevOps for the CI/CD pipeline. All you have to do is build the code, deploy the code onto the Azure App Services. Azure focuses on keeping the environment up and running for the application what you have deployed. So since this is a platform as a service, that is how this service will work. Azure App Service is an HTTP based service for hosting your web application, and it will support REST APIs and mobile backends as well. So we are talking about apps, apps. So what is this apps all about? Apps are nothing but the applications. So the app is the short form of the application itself. So whenever we deploy the application in a traditional way, which can be on the virtual machine or it can be on the physical server, we deploy the application. So application is basically a modules of the code. So we have the code which can be combined as an exe file, and we can execute this particular exe file to install the application on the virtual machine or the physical machine. To access this application, we have something called as application client. So this is nothing but the client application. So we have the application which is running on the server, and there is also an application which acts as a client. This client will interact with the application which has been installed on the server. So this application is the one which is doing the business or some logical operations or some logical functions. So we have the client which will interact with the application server. The application server is the one which is doing the business or logical process. And using the client, we are able to access the application. We input some data here, and the logics and all the processing, everything will be done at the application layer. So this particular layer sends the output for the input what we have given from the client machine. So this is how the traditional application will work with the application server and the application client. So in Azure, the same application is called as web app because this particular web app is accessible via the browser. So we have the browser to access this particular application, whatever we deploy on the Azure cloud. So we access the app using the browser, and we provide the input. The logics, everything will be performed at this web application layer. The web app is the one which is doing the logical operation or logical processing or the business processing. And we are able to interact with this browser to the web application. So this web application, whatever we deploy on the Azure cloud, we have all these languages which are supported. .NET, .NET Core, Java, Ruby, Node.js, PHP, and Python. So we use any one of these languages, we deploy the application, and we deploy this application as a web application. The web application will be accessible by the browser. Usually the browser is simply a static which has the HTML code and which has the CSS cascaded style sheet. When we embed some logics on the application itself so that it is accessible via the browser, so this logics which is going to interact with the web application using the browser. Let us understand the web application using a banking application. I have a banking application. So this is there in the cloud. It might be in Azure cloud. And how do we access this banking app server? I will use the web browser, right? So I use the web browser to access the banking website, and this will be the net banking website. So I enter my user ID and password to connect to the banking server or banking application. You use the user ID and password. So this is the dynamic web page wherein there are scripts which are embedded. There are scripts which are embedded which will interact with the banking application. This is not a static web page like the news portal or some blogs. So this is a dynamic web page which you will be accessing from the web server of the banking website. Once you are able to interact with the browser, then this will be your web application. So basically you are interacting with your banking application using the browser with the embedded scripts, which is nothing but the dynamic web page. So let us understand what are API apps. Much like hosting a website, you can also build REST-based APIs by using your choice of language and framework. You can also use Azure Marketplace to publish your APIs. The produced applications can be consumed from HTTP or HTTPS based clients. If I wanted to give a use case for the API apps, then we can use the Azure cloud itself. So we have the cloud, Azure cloud. How do we interact with the Azure cloud? We interact with either CLI or portal or using the SDKs, right? We issue some command to create the virtual machine. It can be virtual network, it can be storage, account, it can be Kubernetes, it can be containers. So all these resources, what we are going to provision, what are we going to provision? Either we use the CLI, the portal, or the SDK, right? Whenever you issue any of the command to create any of the resources, Azure itself has something called as service fabric. This particular service fabric will be integrated with the API app. And the service fabric in turn has multiple resource provider for the compute, for the storage, for the network, for the containers, Kubernetes. So we have multiple resource provider from the service fabric. So when you issue the command to create any of the resources, whatever the commands which you have issued, everything will be sent as a API request. Let us take another use case using the mobile wallet. If I am using a mobile wallet, I'll be able to make payment for phone, water supply, electric. So these are some of the vendors to which I'll be able to make the payments, right? So in the phone itself, you have Jio, Airtel, and VI. If I wanted to make payment to the Geo, then I have something called as API integration. So on my mobile, the API integration is the one which is called as client. This client will be interacting with the API apps using HTTPS or HTTP protocol. It will use REST-based API request to transact. And on the backend, there will be API app. So this API app will serve the request for the client, which is coming from the mobile device. So these are the use cases for the API apps. If I take the web jobs are often used to run the background tasks as part of your application logic. If I have an application which is accepting the documents, so let us assume this application is the document processing application and multiple users are sending the documents in different size. So these documents are in different size. When the application accepts the documents, it will send these documents to web jobs. So the web job is to convert the different size of documents to A4 size, A3 size, and A4 size. The main application, which is the front-end application, which will provide immediate response to the users, whereas the web jobs will only work based on the trigger. So it will only accept the document once there is a trigger to convert the documents. Only then this particular web jobs will work. For the web jobs, you have multiple languages which are supported: .exe, Java, PHP, Python, Node.js. We can also use commands and batch, PowerShell, or Bash. Now let us understand what are mobile apps. We can use these mobile apps to build a backend for the iOS and Android apps. We can also store the content of the mobile apps using the cloud-based SQL database. There are n number of authentication providers. We can integrate with the authentication providers like Google, Microsoft Authentication, Twitter, and Facebook. We can also use the configuration for push notification. Also, we can execute C# or Node.js custom-based logics on the mobile apps. These are the 4 types of web application what you can deploy on Azure Cloud. When you wanted to deploy these applications like web application, web jobs, mobile apps, or API apps, we have to create something called as app service plan. Using the same app service plan, we are able to deploy all these 4 types of web applications. We can deploy web app, mobile app, web jobs, and API apps using the same app service plan. The app service plan is nothing but the SKU what you choose to deploy your web applications. The SKUs are free, shared, basic, standard, premium, and isolated. So these are the SKUs which are available to deploy your web applications. You can choose the virtual machine size based on the SKUs whatever you are choosing. And each of the SKUs will have different configuration options. Basically, it will give you more disk space for the application files. And also you can integrate with the network itself, the virtual network. And you can also have SSL configuration. And there are other options which are provided with different SKUs. Thank you for watching the video. If you like the content, please subscribe and share the video. Thank you and take care.